This story is titled, Parents Who Treated Me Like Crap Suddenly Want to Visit Me and Told Me They'll Be Bringing a Surprise. Growing up as the youngest of five sounds like it should be fun, right? You get all the attention, the hand-me-downs, and the wisdom of your older siblings. At least, that's what the movies make it look like. My reality? The youngest by 7 years, stuck in a family that had zero bandwidth left for me. And honestly, it sucked. I wasn't the star or even the troublemaker. I was just there. A literal afterthought. My parents weren't bad people. They were just overwhelmed. My older siblings were all dealing with various issues. Health problems, therapy sessions, school struggles. My parents' lives were a constant rotation of hospital visits, counseling appointments, and meetings with teachers. And me? I was the easy one. No trouble, no drama, no extra effort required. They assumed I was fine because I wasn't demanding anything. Turns out being the kid who's fine means you're also the kid who's forgotten. I remember this one night when I was about 8. My mom was running around trying to pack for my brother's hospital stay. My dad was yelling about misplaced car keys, and my sisters were arguing over who got to use the bathroom first. I sat on the couch with a book in my lap, just waiting. I wasn't even sure what I was waiting for. Someone to notice me, maybe? But no one did. Eventually, I just went to bed without saying goodnight. It wasn't a one-time thing. That's just how it was. They call kids like me glass children. You're visible, but no one really sees you. You're not invisible in the tragic, poetic way. More like furniture in the corner. I didn't need help, so I didn't get it. I didn't cause problems, so I didn't get attention. I know my parents weren't trying to be neglectful. They were just stretched too thin. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. It wasn't all bad, though. Since no one paid much attention to me, I had a lot of freedom. I spent hours alone, reading books or playing video games. I'd explore the woods near our house, pretending I was on some grand adventure. Looking back, it was probably a little sad, but at the time, it felt normal. When I was 9, I made my first real friends, Mia and Clara. They were both from messy families too, and we kind of gravitated toward each other. Mia's parents were divorced and constantly arguing, so she spent most of her time at Clara's house. Clara's dad was, well, not around, and her mom worked double shifts to make ends meet. We were all these little lost kids, and we found each other. I think that's what kept me sane. Mia and Clara were my escape, my real family. We did everything together. Sleepovers, homework, sneaking into the local movie theater by hiding in the trunk of Clara's mom's car. Typical kid stuff. By the time we were in middle school, we had our own little world. We even made up a club, the Unwanted Club. We weren't dramatic about it. It was just a name that fit. Our real families sucked, so we made our own. But as great as Mia and Clara were, there was still this gnawing feeling in the back of my mind. I wanted my parents to notice me. Not in a big, flashy way. Just something small. Like, hey, how was your day? Or, what book are you reading? But those moments never came. I remember once I got a perfect score on my math test. I ran home, excited to tell someone. But the second I walked in, I saw my mom on the phone with the school counselor about one of my sisters. I quietly put the paper on the fridge, hoping someone would notice. No one did. By the time I hit high school, I'd stopped trying. I wasn't angry, just resigned. If they didn't care, why should I? I poured all my energy into school and my part-time job at the library. I loved working there. It was quiet, and no one expected much from me. Plus, it meant I didn't have to be home. My parents barely noticed I was gone most of the time. I think they assumed I was at Mia or Clara's house, and they were probably right. I started staying out later and later, testing the limits, but no one ever said a word. One time I got home at midnight, and the house was completely dark. Not a single person asked where I'd been. I could have been kidnapped or lying in a ditch for all they knew. Senior year rolled around, and I started applying to colleges. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not my siblings, no one. I didn't see the point. They wouldn't care until they had to care. And by then, it would be too late. My friends knew, of course. We made a pact. Get into the same college and leave this town behind. It was the only thing that kept me going some days. When I got my first acceptance letter, I didn't even bother showing it to my parents. I just filed it away in my desk and went about my day. It wasn't until I got my financial aid package that I realized I might actually have a shot at leaving. Between scholarships and grants, I could cover most of the costs. My grandma, the only family member who seemed to care about my future, offered to help with the rest. She told me, I don't trust your parents not to screw this up for you. And honestly, same. The day I left for college, I didn't even say goodbye. I packed my car, waved to my mom as she passed me in the hallway, and drove off. I don't think she realized what was happening. I wasn't trying to be dramatic or make a statement. I just didn't think it mattered. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I wasn't anyone's afterthought. I wasn't the invisible kid in the corner. I was just me, and it felt amazing. When the day came for me to leave for college, it was so unremarkable that it might as well have been any other Tuesday. No teary goodbyes, no last-minute hugs. Honestly, I don't even think my parents knew I was leaving. I'd packed up my stuff gradually over the last couple of weeks, and on the morning of, I loaded the rest into my beat-up hand-me-down car and left. My mom walked by me in the hallway while I was hauling a box, glanced at it, and said, "You're doing some cleaning?" I just said, "Yep," and kept walking. That was the extent of our interaction. I wasn't mad about it at the time. By then, I had stopped expecting anything from them. They didn't notice when I stayed out late, didn't notice when I stopped trying to join family dinners, and certainly didn't notice that I had spent months planning to move 2 states away with Mia and Clara. They probably assumed I was going to community college down the street or something. Joke's on them. The drive to my new college town was the most freeing experience of my life. Mia was in the passenger seat, and Clara followed in her car, packed to the brim with her stuff. We blasted terrible early 2000s pop songs the entire way, laughing and shouting lyrics out the windows, like we were starring in some low-budget coming-of-age movie. It wasn't just about going to college. It was about starting a new life, one where we weren't the unwanted kids anymore. We were just ourselves. Once we arrived, we moved into this tiny off-campus apartment. And when I say tiny, I mean the kind of place where you could stand in the living room and touch the kitchen counter with one hand and the front door with the other. It was falling apart in places. The sink dripped, the floor tiles were peeling, and the bathroom door didn't lock. But we didn't care. It was ours. Those first few months flew by in a blur. I threw myself into classes and a part-time job at the local coffee shop, trying to balance everything while still figuring out how to be a functional adult. It was hard at times. Money was always tight, and I had to learn how to stretch $20 to last an entire week. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. No one ignored me here because no one expected anything from me to begin with. I could just exist. My parents didn't call. They didn't text. Nothing. At first, I thought maybe they didn't have my new number or had forgotten about me entirely. But then I got a random text from my mom a few months in. She wrote, "Can you grab some milk on your way home?" I stared at the message for a solid minute before responding, "I don't live there anymore." She replied, "Oh, okay. Let me know when you visit." Like I'd just gone on a long camping trip and would be back any day now. I didn't bother correcting her. Why would I? If she wanted to believe I was just out, that was fine by me. It wasn't like they'd cared much about what I was doing before I left. Why start now? Meanwhile, my grandma became my lifeline. She'd call every few weeks to check in, ask how school was going, and remind me that she had my back if I ever needed anything. She wasn't perfect. She had her moments of meddling and unsolicited advice. But at least she cared. She told me, "Don't let your parents screw this up for you." I didn't realize at the time just how much that would matter later. The disconnect between my parents and me became even more obvious when Thanksgiving rolled around. By that point, I'd settled into a routine: classes, work, and hanging out with Mia and Clara in the evenings. We didn't have a lot of money, but we'd managed to save up for a Friendsgiving feast. We bought a turkey, the smallest one we could find, a box of instant mashed potatoes, and some canned cranberry sauce. It was nothing fancy, but it was ours. We even made terrible paper decorations to hang around the apartment. 2 days before Thanksgiving, my mom called me. It was the first time she'd called in months, and I almost didn't pick up because I figured she was butt dialing me or something. But curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "Hey, what time are you coming for Thanksgiving?" she asked, completely out of the blue. I blinked. I didn't know you guys were doing anything for Thanksgiving." "Well, we weren't sure, but we figured it'd be nice to have the family together for once," she said, like it was no big deal. "So, what time can we expect you?" "I already have plans," I said, glancing over at Mia and Clara, who were sorting through our tiny pantry to see if we had room for more snacks. "I'm hosting a thing with some friends." There was a long pause, and then she said, "Oh, I guess that's fine. It's just, I was really looking forward to seeing you." That one sentence hit me in a weird way. I couldn't tell if she was trying to guilt trip me or if she genuinely meant it. Either way, it didn't matter. She'd given me 2 days' notice, like I could just drop everything and drive 2 states over to play Happy Family with people who barely remembered I existed. "I'm sorry, but I can't make it." I said as politely as I could. Maybe we can catch up another time? She didn't say anything for a while, and then she sighed. Okay, well, I hope you have a good Thanksgiving. She hung up before I could respond. That night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There weren't many of my family, mostly just pictures of Mia and Clara and me goofing off over the years. But as I looked through them, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because part of me still wanted to matter to my parents. Relief because I knew I didn't need to. Friendsgiving was perfect. We burned half the food, Clara spilled cranberry sauce all over the couch, and Mia set off the smoke alarm trying to make gravy. But we laughed until our sides hurt. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something real. That feeling didn't last long, though. A few years later, I got another call, this time from my dad. And that's when everything started to unravel. The call from my dad came completely out of the blue. I'd been avoiding family contact for weeks after the Thanksgiving situation. I wasn't mad, just tired of feeling like an afterthought that suddenly mattered when it suited them. But when his name popped up on my phone, curiosity got the better of me. I figured it had to be important. He barely ever called, even when I was living at home. I answered with a cautious, "Hello? Olivia?" he said, his tone clipped and serious. "If you don't come home for Christmas, I'm cutting off your college payments." I blinked. At first, I thought I must have misheard him. "Wait, what?" I asked, trying not to laugh. "Dad, I graduated 3 years ago." The silence on the other end was almost comical. He clearly hadn't expected that response. "Oh, well," he finally sputtered. "I just meant, you need to come home. It's important." I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. So I asked, "Why? What's so important?" "It's Christmas," he snapped, like that explained everything. "The family needs to be together. You're being selfish, Olivia. After everything your mother and I have done for you, the least you could do is come home for the holidays." At that point, I couldn't hold back the laugh. "Dad, Grandma paid for my college, remember? You didn't have anything to do with it." He paused again, probably trying to figure out how to salvage this ridiculous argument. "We've sacrificed a lot for you over the years," he said, ignoring my point entirely. "It's time you showed some gratitude." I didn't even know how to respond to that. Gratitude? For what? The years of being ignored. The complete lack of support or interest in my life. The sudden guilt trips and demands for attention now that it was convenient for them. It was so absurd that I almost hung up right then and there. But I didn't. Part of me wanted to see how far he'd go with this. "Dad," I said as calmly as I could, "I've already made plans for Christmas. I'm not canceling them last minute. If you and Mom want to catch up after the holidays, we can talk then." He didn't like that answer. "You're abandoning your family," he said, his voice rising. "Do you even care about us at all?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "You didn't care about me for the last 20-something years, and now suddenly I'm the bad guy for not dropping everything to make you feel better? That's not fair. We've always cared about you," he snapped. "You just never needed as much as the others." There it was. The same excuse I'd heard my whole life, wrapped up in slightly different words. "That's not my fault," I said. "And it doesn't mean I owe you anything now." He didn't respond, and I figured the conversation was over. But a few hours later, I got another text from him. This one was much shorter and colder. "If you don't come home, don't bother coming back at all." I stared at my phone for what felt like forever. Part of me wanted to fire back with something snarky or angry, but another part of me, the bigger part, was just tired. Tired of the guilt trips. Tired of the manipulation. Tired of being treated like a backup plan instead of a person. So I put my phone down and didn't respond. The next day, I got a text from my mom. It wasn't as blunt as my dad's message, but it was dripping with passive-aggressive guilt. She wrote, "We're so disappointed in you, Olivia. We don't understand why you're being so distant. We're your family." I laughed when I read that. Distant? I'd been distant my whole life, and they were just now noticing? It was almost funny, but as much as I wanted to let it roll off my back, there was this tiny part of me that felt that old, familiar sting of guilt. That little voice in the back of my mind whispering, "Maybe they're right. Maybe you are being selfish." I tried to ignore it. I threw myself into work and school, went out with Mia and Clara, and tried to focus on the good things in my life. But the texts kept coming. My mom, my dad, even one of my brothers, they all seemed to be working together to guilt trip me into coming home for Christmas. It was relentless. Then, about a week before Christmas, I got a call from Jake, my older brother. I hadn't spoken to him in years. Out of all my siblings, he was the one I thought might understand me the most. He wasn't as sick as the others. And we'd had a few decent conversations when we were kids. So when his name popped up on my phone, I actually felt a flicker of hope. I answered with a hesitant, "Hey Jake, what's up?" "Hey, Liv," he said, using the nickname I hadn't heard in years. "Look, I know things have been tense with Mom and Dad, but we need to talk." "Okay," I said, already bracing myself. "About what?" There was a long pause before he finally said, "They've been talking about making you the legal guardian for one of the boys." My heart dropped. "What? You're the only one who's really stable," he said, like it was the most logical thing in the world. "The rest of us, well, we've got our own issues. Mom and Dad think you'd be the best choice." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After years of barely acknowledging my existence, they wanted to dump this massive responsibility on me? I felt my anger bubbling to the surface, but I tried to stay calm. And they just decided this without talking to me? "They've been planning it for a while," Jake admitted. "I thought you should know before they sprung it on you." I was furious. "No," I said firmly. "Tell them I'm not interested." "Liv, come on," he said, his tone pleading. "You're part of the family." "Family?" I snapped. "Don't talk to me about family, Jake. They ignored me for my entire childhood. Now that they need something, suddenly I'm part of the family? I'm done." There was a long silence before he finally said, "Okay, I get it. I'll tell them." I hung up and sat there, staring at the wall, trying to process everything. It wasn't just about Christmas anymore. They were trying to use me, again. But this time, I wasn't going to let them. After that call with Jake, I couldn't shake the anger boiling inside me. I mean, who just decides that someone's going to become a legal guardian without even asking them? It wasn't a casual favor they were requesting. It was my entire life they were trying to hijack. I replayed Jake's words in my head over and over. "You're the only one who's really stable." Oh, now I was the stable one? Convenient. For years, I was invisible to them. They didn't care about my good grades, my part-time jobs, or even when I left home without a word. But now that I'd managed to build something for myself, I was suddenly the responsible one, the stable one, the one they could count on to clean up their mess. It was infuriating. I didn't respond to Jake for days. What was there to say? I knew he wasn't entirely at fault. He was just the messenger. But that didn't make it any less insulting. Meanwhile, the texts from my parents kept coming. My dad sent another one-liner. "Don't make us regret trusting you." Trusting me? They hadn't trusted me with anything my entire life, but now they wanted me to take over their responsibilities? I wanted to ignore them, but the messages made it impossible. My mom sent long, rambling texts about how family sticks together and how they'd sacrificed so much for us kids. Sacrificed? For who? Because it sure as hell wasn't for me. I didn't respond to her either. I couldn't. Every time I started typing something, the words just felt inadequate to explain how much they'd hurt me over the years. Then, about a week later, I got another surprise. My mom showed up at my apartment. It was a Saturday morning, and I just sat down with a cup of coffee to binge a new show on Netflix. When I heard the knock on my door, I assumed it was Mia or Clara coming over unannounced, like they usually did. But when I opened the door, there was my mom, standing there with this strained, almost desperate look on her face. "Mom?" I said, blinking in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," she said, brushing past me like she owned the place. I was too stunned to stop her. She walked into my tiny living room, looked around at my mismatched furniture and cluttered coffee table and said, "This is where you live?" "Yes," I said, crossing my arms. "And I like it. What do you want?" She sighed, sinking onto my secondhand couch like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Your father's health is getting worse," she said quietly. "He's in and out of the hospital, and we don't know how much time he has left." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. I wasn't heartless. I didn't want my dad to suffer. But the timing felt so calculated. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said cautiously. "But what does that have to do with me?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a second I felt a pang of guilt. But then she said, "We need you to step up, Olivia. Your brothers need someone to take care of them when we're gone." There it was. The real reason she'd come. It wasn't about reconnecting or apologizing for the years of neglect. It was about finding someone to clean up the mess they'd created. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not doing it." "Olivia, please," she said, her voice trembling. "We're desperate. Jake can't handle it, and Sarah has enough on her plate. You're the only one who—" "I'm the only one who what?" I snapped, cutting her off. "The only one who managed to get out and build a life for myself? That's not my fault. You and Dad made your choices. You chose to focus on everyone else and ignore me. Now you want me to fix everything? I'm not your backup plan." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying again. But instead, she said, "We did the best we could. You don't understand what it was like, raising 5 kids, dealing with all the stress, the bills, the appointments. And that's my fault?" I interrupted. "You had 5 kids. You made that choice. Don't guilt me for your decisions." She stared at me, stunned into silence. I don't think she'd ever heard me talk to her like that before. Growing up, I'd always been the quiet one, the agreeable one, but I wasn't that kid anymore. "I'm sorry that things are hard for you right now," I said, softening my tone just a little. "But I've spent my entire life being invisible to this family. I'm not going to let you drag me back into it now, just because it's convenient for you." Her expression shifted then, from desperation to anger. "So that's it?" she said, her voice shaking. "You're just going to turn your back on us?" "No," I said. "You turned your back on me a long time ago. I'm just finally walking away." She stood up, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. For a moment, I thought she might say something else, but instead, she just shook her head and walked out the door. I stood there for a while after she left, staring at the empty space where she'd been. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I just felt tired. Mia and Clara came over later that afternoon, and I told them what had happened. Clara, as always, didn't hold back. "Screw her," she said. "They don't deserve you." Mia was quieter, but she nodded in agreement. "You have to protect yourself, Liv. You've worked too hard to let them drag you down." They were right, of course. But even with their support, I couldn't shake the guilt completely. I'd been conditioned my whole life to believe that family came first, no matter what. Letting go of that mindset wasn't easy, even when I knew it was the right thing to do. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from my mom. She must have written it before the visit, because it was full of the same guilt-tripping nonsense I'd heard 100 times before. How much they'd sacrificed, how disappointed they were in me, how I was abandoning the family. I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. I was done. Blocking their numbers felt like a breath of fresh air. After years of being guilt-tripped and ignored whenever it wasn't convenient for them, I finally had control. I didn't have to wake up to passive-aggressive texts or brace myself for the next emotionally manipulative phone call. For the first time in years, I felt like I could just exist without the weight of their expectations suffocating me. But, of course, peace never lasts long in my family. It was a Saturday morning, and I was lounging in my apartment with a cup of coffee and a book. I'd turned my phone off the night before to give myself a break from the constant pings of notifications, mostly from distant relatives chiming in with their unsolicited opinions about family obligations. Apparently, my mom had made the rounds, spinning her story of how I was abandoning everyone. I wasn't even surprised anymore. When I heard the knock at the door, I assumed it was Mia or Clara dropping by. They did that a lot, especially after my mom's surprise visit earlier that week. So, without thinking, I called out, "It's open," while flipping the page of my book. The knock came again, louder this time. Weird. Mia usually barged in, and Clara would have texted to let me know she was on her way. I sighed, setting my mug down, and shuffled to the door, still in my pajamas. The second I opened it, my stomach dropped. There she was, my mom again, standing on my doorstep like she'd just popped over to borrow some sugar. "Mom?" I said, my voice sharp. "What are you doing here, Aegean?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she gave me this strained smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Can I come in?" "No," I replied flatly, crossing my arms. "Whatever you want to say, you can say it here." Her face fell, but she didn't budge. "Olivia, I'm not here to fight. I just want to talk." I let out a frustrated sigh. "We've already talked. You showed up uninvited, dumped a pile of guilt on me, and then left. What more is there to say?" Her voice softened, and she clasped her hands together, like she was trying to keep herself from breaking apart. "Your father's getting worse. The doctors don't think he has much time left." There it was, the card she'd been waiting to play. The "your father is dying" card. I should have seen it coming, but it still hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't heartless. I didn't want my dad to suffer. But after everything they'd put me through, I couldn't just drop everything and rush to their side. That part of me, the part that would have sacrificed anything for their approval, was gone. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully, keeping my voice steady. "But this still isn't my responsibility." Her eyes widened like I'd just slapped her. "How can you say that? He's your father. And I'm his daughter," I shot back. "The one he ignored for 25 years. The one who wasn't worth noticing until he needed something." "That's not fair," she said, her voice trembling. "We did the best we could." "Did you?" I asked, my anger bubbling to the surface. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you chose to focus on everyone else and left me to fend for myself." And now, because I actually managed to build a life for myself, you're trying to drag me back into the mess you created. That's not my fault, Mom. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she straightened up, her expression hardening. So, that's it? You're just going to turn your back on your family? I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. No, Mom. You turned your back on me a long time ago. I'm just finally walking away. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at me like she didn't recognize the person in front of her. Maybe she didn't. The Olivia she knew, the quiet, obedient girl who never caused problems, was gone. This Olivia wasn't going to bend over backward to please people who'd never cared about her in the first place. Finally, she shook her head and muttered, "I don't even know who you are anymore." "That makes two of us," I said, my voice cold. "Maybe if you'd bothered to get to know me when I was a kid, this wouldn't be such a shock." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned to leave. But before she stepped through the door, she looked back and said, "You'll regret this one day, Olivia. When we're gone, you'll wish you'd been there." I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to. I just closed the door behind her and leaned against it, feeling a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. Relief, sadness, anger. They were all there, colliding with each other in a way that left me feeling completely drained. Mia and Clara came over later that day, and when I told them what had happened, Clara was furious. "She has some nerve," she said, pacing the living room like she was ready to fight my mom herself. "I swear if she shows up here again, I'll handle it." Mia was quieter, sitting beside me on the couch with a look of concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. "It just feels final, you know? Like this is the last straw." "That's because it is," Mia said gently. "You've done everything you can, Liv. They made their choices. Now it's time for you to make yours." She was right. For years, I'd let their guilt and manipulation control me, even when I thought I was free. But this was my breaking point. I wasn't going to let them take any more from me. Later that night, I blocked my mom's number, along with my dad's and Jake's. I even went through my social media accounts, tightening up my privacy settings and blocking anyone who might try to intervene on their behalf. It felt drastic, but necessary. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was choosing myself, and it felt like freedom.